I had a friend from church bring over her little library and ask me if I could repair it. Now, this thing has seen some miles and it was pretty beat up, but I noticed that whoever built it didn't really do that good of a job to begin with. It was clear that there was water damage in several spots, and even the door itself was falling off and showing signs of rot. I told my friend that I'd rather toss this thing into my neighbor's pool and that instead I'd build her a brand new one. So I heaved it off to the side and I went upstairs and began designing one in Fusion 360. And this is what I came up with. It sort of resembles a Craftsman-style cottage with simple, clean lines. I've never built anything like this before, so this should be interesting. And hopefully fun. Well, let's get into it. I picked up a 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch radiata pine plywood, and I cut out all the pieces of the main structure on the table saw. Then when it came time to cut the opening for the door, I measured out where it needed to go on the front piece, and then I took it back to the table saw. I removed the riving knife, which you shouldn't do if you're not comfortable using this technique. And then I lowered the blade all the way down. Basically, I'm doing a reverse plunge cut using the table saw. I put the piece against the fence, turned on the saw, and then raised the blade up until it popped through. But you gotta be really careful when going backwards with the cut, because if you don't, you may find yourself chewing on some plywood because the saw will just throw the whole piece at your face. So to play it safe, for the other cuts, I didn't even try to go backwards. When I needed to cut further back, I just lowered the blade all the way down again, moved the piece, and then brought it back up. I used this technique to cut out the 4 sides of the door opening in the front, but since the blade is round, I couldn't cut all the way to the corners. I just got it as close as I could, and then I would finish it out by hand. And to do that, I just used an ordinary pole saw, and that made short work of it. These pieces are a little too big for my table saw, so to cut the angle of the roof into the front and the back pieces, I just taped them together, I drew on the guidelines, and then I used my track saw. Easy as that. Now, all the plywood pieces are done and ready to be assembled. And to do that, I just used waterproof glue and some brad nails. There's one side. And there's the other. Now I could tip the thing down, put glue around the edge, and drop on the front. And then I just did the same thing for the back. To make the corner trim pieces, I just used 2x4s. I picked up the premium stud boards so that they would have the fewest knots, twists, and defects, but in the end, they're still just 2x4s. I cut them down on the table saw, and then I could glue them together in pairs to make the corner pieces. And I just repeated that 3 more times to make the rest. Later that day, once the glue had dried, I could take all the clamps off. They all got a 45-degree angle cut into their top ends to match the pitch of the roof. 2 going one way, and the other 2 going the other way. Then at this point, I could glue and nail them all into place. Now, as an experiment, I wanted to see if I could give the little library some more character. I mocked up a few pieces, and when I stacked them together, it really looked like the exterior siding of a house. I liked it, so I decided to go for it. So to make it, I first had to cut a bajillion 1/4-inch strips from the pieces of 2x4s. Then each one got cut down so that it was only 1 inch wide. This took a while, and it took a toll on my back. Next, I tilted the blade of my table saw to 5 degrees. I changed the width to 1/8 of an inch, and then ran all the pieces through again to give them that subtle taper. This way, the pieces can sit flat against the sides of the structure, but still give that layered look that typical exterior siding has. To put them on, I just squirted on a ton of glue and I spread it all around using my wife's favorite comb. And once I had it thoroughly covering the entire side, I just started stacking up the pieces. And when I got towards the top, I just used pieces that were longer and they hung over the sides. Just like that. It looks awesome. Then, when everything had time to dry, I just used a flush trim saw to cut off the overhanging pieces, and then I turned the whole structure over and could work on another side. And before I knew it, I had the entire thing sided and looking fantastic. Now it's time for the roof. I kept it easy and I just used a 45-degree angle for the roof. So to get those two panels to fit together just right, I had to put that angle onto the edges. Also, there's some fascia pieces that go around the entire roof's edge, and I just ripped those out of some more 2x4 pieces. Mitering the ends, and now I can put together the fascia peaks. There's a couple different ways you could do this, but I just found that gluing and nailing them together was the quickest way and it yielded good results. Plus, all the nail holes get covered, so you'll never see them in the end. Next, the roof panels can get glued together. This was a pretty tricky piece to clamp, but I have these nifty 90-degree thingamajigs from Rockler, and that held them in just the right place long enough for me to get some nails in. Then one of the fascia peaks can go on. And the other one. And now the rest of the fascia can go on. There's two little blocks that get attached to the ends, and then the whole thing can get glued and nailed onto the side of the roof. And there's a shelf that goes on the inside so that the little library can hold twice as many books as before. So I pop on a set of cleats that can hold it up, and then I drop in the shelf. So now it's time to try making that little round attic window you saw in the design. I started by using a 5-inch hole saw to cut out the opening for it. It took a while, but eventually I punched all the way through. Then, to make the casing, I attempted to make it with ordinary power tools, but it blew up in my hands, I almost got hurt, and I wet my pants. You'll see for yourself in the outtakes. At that point, I just decided to use the CNC and make it perfect on the first try. Once the carve was complete, I could cut the tabs and then sand everything smooth over at the spindle sander. The little slots in the casing are for the dividers. I cut out a couple little pieces that had a dado cut in the center. This let me put them together to form a cross, which then could be tapped into place within the window casing. Just like that. And now I could dry fit the assembly into the hole and make sure it fits. Now for the window itself, I'm just using acrylic, so I cut out a circle of it on the bandsaw, and then I flush trimmed it to fit the casing over at the router table. With that done, I could move on to what's next. I wanted to add a vent in the back, and I'm not certain if it's needed, but it certainly won't hurt. I ordered this tiny 3D printed vent cover online for just a couple bucks, and it fit perfectly into the hole. After that, I could start making the casing for the main door. Similar to the corner trim, I just got to glue together a couple pieces 4 times. And once they're dry, I pop off the clamps. Now each piece gets mitered ends over at the miter saw, and I just take my time and I sneak up on the perfect fit. And once I had everything fitting nicely, I take the pieces out and then glue them together using a band clamp, making sure to keep them perfectly square. Then when it's dry, I could give it some taparoos and get it seated fully into the opening and then pop in some brads to secure it in place. Now to make the door itself, I decided to use half laps. I chose this because it's pretty easy to make on the table saw and it's a super strong joint. And another bonus of using half laps is that they're really easy to glue up because they fit together and they hold each other square. I just threw on a single clamp at each corner and that's all that was needed. So I'm going to be using a piano hinge, and because I want there to be an even gap around the door, I needed to inlay it on both the casing and the door. To do that, I just outline it with a razor blade, use a router to remove the bulk of the waste, and then chisel out whatever's remaining. And just like that, the hinge will now fit in there perfectly flush. To install the dividers in the door, I just set up a temporary fence by clamping on a scrap piece of plywood, and then I used my router to cut little grooves at the center of each side of the frame. I started pretty shallow, and then I just gradually increased the depth of cut until it was deep enough for the dividers to be fully seated. And once I had those made, I could just put a little glue down in each one and then tap the dividers into place. Now to make the door see-through, I just went with acrylic just like I used for the little window. I cut it down to size over at the table saw, and then I just drilled and screwed it right into the back of the door. And to secure it in place, I used some flathead screws. Now you might be thinking, wait, those are roundhead screws. Well, yeah, but you use a flathead screwdriver. So in my shop, they're called roundhead flatheads. And that makes perfect sense to me since I'm a maniac. I twisted in a little knob into the door. And then I figured magnets might be a good way to keep the door closed. So I drilled a couple slightly undersized holes into the corners of the door. Put some CA glue on a magnet, and then I pressed it into place. Then to add the ones on the door casing, I just stuck them to the door magnets. I added some glue to the other side of it, sprayed some activator, and then closed the door. This way the magnets are perfectly lined up with one another, and they actually work really nicely, even better than a typical latch would. Now you know how the saying goes, try your best and caulk the rest. Well, fortunately any goofs or mistakes can really be covered up and hidden with caulk on this project. Naturally, there were some small gaps along the corner trim pieces that needed to be filled, plus this helps to keep the exterior completely water and weatherproof. I made sure to seal up around the little window, and I just smoothed it out as best as I could with my finger. And since I really wanted to make it impossible for water to get in anywhere, I also sealed every single piece of siding around the entire library. I'm pretty sure you could chuck this whole thing into a lake and the books inside would remain dry. Now for paint, I chose a high-quality exterior product, and I brushed on a couple coats of white inside and outside of the whole thing. I didn't worry about getting it on the trim because I'll handle that next. Now while that was drying, I could work on the roof. And instead of putting on an underlayment, I figured this Flex Seal would be a really good alternative. It was certainly cheaper, and I think it'll actually even work better. See, this stuff is essentially liquid rubber, and it pretty much makes anything waterproof. It's pretty fantastic. But I wish I did this outside instead of in my shop. It made the whole place smell stronger than a Taco Bell restroom. And since it was right next to my furnace, all the fumes got blown throughout the entire house, and my whole family could taste colors for about an hour or so until I got the place aired out. To paint the trim, I made sure to tape things up real good. I used a little scraper to get the tape up into each ridge of the siding and to mask off all the areas that needed to stay white. After that, I could go around and put on a couple coats of black onto all the trim, the window and door casing, and the fascia around the roof. And once it was dry, I could gently peel off the masking tape. And for the most part, the lines were pretty good. There were a couple spots where the black paint bled underneath the tape, but I just used a small artist's brush and I did some touch-ups to make it look nice. To seal up both the window and the door, I squirted on some clear silicone around the inside edges. Then I dropped on the acrylic inserts and I put the roundhead flatheads back in to squish it down and hold everything in place. Now the roof assembly can finally go on. I drilled some mounting holes and screwed it on. I grabbed a few shingles off my neighbor's house and I cut them down to size so that they'd fit on this little roof. I'd just use a razor on the backside to score them and then just fold them and they'd break apart along the line. Then with 3/4 inch roofing nails, I'd hammer them on. Any excess got lopped off, and then I just repeated the same thing for the other side. Now for the ridge line, I made some smaller ones, and I just started mounting them from either side. Then I just rubber coated the nails of the last one since they weren't covered by any shingle. I'm sure I have a bunch of roofers screaming at their computers right now, but hey, I think it'll be just fine. I popped on the library charter sign, and then I thought I could make it even cooler by drilling a hole into the back of it so that bees could get in and build nests in there. I'm just kidding. I picked up this solar-powered strand of LED lights, and I thought it would be neat if the library could light up at night. So I superglued the panel into the hole, and then I caulked around the gaps to seal it up. And then here's the finished product. Man, it just turned out looking super, super cool. The little circular window is such a neat accent. It really adds a lot to the look, in my opinion, as well as the faux siding that I made. It makes it look just like a little house. The door came out looking like a big window, and the magnets do such a good job of holding it closed. And with the weatherproofed exterior and the vented interior, I think that the books inside should remain pretty well protected. The LED lights work so good, too. It looks so neat being lit up from the inside when it gets dark. It just turned out perfect, and I couldn't be happier with it. Well, let's get this thing ready for install. The first thing I'll need to do is to mount on the base that'll attach to the 4x4 post. I'm just going to use the old one since it's still fine, and I'll just screw it right into the bottom of the library. And once we brought it over to my friend's house, my wife and I lugged it across their yard and over to the post where the old one used to be mounted. From there, we could lift it up and get it seated on top of the post so that the angled supports were lined up with the sides of the 4x4. Then it was just a matter of driving in some hefty lag bolts to secure it in place. The last thing to do was to get it loaded up with all the books that were in the previous one. Now this new library is much bigger, and it could actually hold a lot more too, which is great. I'm so pleased with how it turned out. I just think it looks great. If you think it's neat and you want to make one for your neighborhood, then be sure to pick up a set of the detailed step-by-step instructions on how to build it that are available on my website over at fishersshoponline.com. They're just $5, and it's a great way to show your support too. I'll be able to buy some more roundhead flatheads. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video and you feel I've earned it, then give the video a like, leave me a comment, and if you're new, consider subscribing to the channel. Stay tuned to see the outtakes, and until next time, take care, and I'll see you later.
No wonder that wasn't working. Forgot to take off my riving knife. Idiot. Crap! Oh, I'm way off. Well, crap. I'm way off. Male poop. Crap. Whoa. Whoa! 2 of them. Nuts.
I saw it.
Yeah, I'll pop those back out. Do it again. There. No, these pieces go... They go like this, not like this. Ugh. So I just cut these wrong. Crap. Crap. Oh, well that wandered all over the place. Well, that's not gonna work. Okay. Abort mission. Let's try a different bit with a brad point. Okay. I was worried that that would happen. That was a close call. I'm not a fan of close calls. Alright, we're just gonna make this thing on the CNC and call it good.